Our job is to hit the target, not to count the body bags.
We are in a combat scenario and losses are a part of combat. The question that you must ask us, okay, have we achieved our objective of decimating the terrorist camp? And the answer is a thumping yes.
तुम हमारा पानी बंद कर दोगे, हम तुम्हारा सांस बंद कर देंगे.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the situation in the second week of May. Before that, 5 weeks ago, terrorists struck in Pahalgam, Jammu and Kashmir. 26 Indian tourists were murdered in cold blood. It was not just another terror attack, it was a clear message. And India responded. Operation Sindoor was swift, precise, and uncompromising. Within days, India had struck back across the border, targeting the very camps and handlers responsible for the carnage. The operation was clearly a military success. There's no doubt about that. But today, we look at what lies beyond the battlefield. Will Pakistan, which continues to harbor and support terror groups, treat this strike as a deterrent, or simply absorb the cost and strike again when the time suits them? We've seen a clear pattern. In 2016, we carried out surgical strikes. In 2019, the Balakot strike sent a harder message. And now in 2025, Operation Sindoor has taken that doctrine even further. Is India steadily raising the bar with each response? Or are we still in a reactive posture, waiting for the next provocation before acting? There's another question. Did this limited war end too soon? India inflicted damage, but was it enough to fundamentally shift Pakistan's calculus? Or have we once again settled for a tactical retaliation without strategic consequence? We'll also examine how the Western media has covered this conflict. Despite clear evidence of a terror attack on Indian civilians, much of the global coverage was slanted, equating the aggressor and the victim, urging both sides to de-escalate, while actually ignoring the facts on the ground. India cannot and will not allow narratives to be dictated by selective outrage or geopolitical convenience. Finally, we look inward. Operation Sindoor has demonstrated the operational readiness of the Indian armed forces. The intelligence was accurate, execution was professional, but are we prepared for the long game this conflict demands? These are the questions we will tackle today. With veterans of the Indian Armed Forces who have fought on the front lines, and with the senior diplomats who've negotiated across the table. This is not a time for rhetoric. This is a time for clarity, for strategy, and for resolve. I have two veterans with me from the Indian Armed Forces. Lieutenant General Atta Hasnain, commander of the 15 Corps, prestigious Corps, and the Strike Corps. And I have Commodore Uday Bhaskar, who's a well-known face, international affairs strategic expert, and he's headed almost 3 think tanks.
Thank you.
Let me start with you, General Hasnain. The defense minister today asked Pakistan to hand over 2 people, the 2 Maulanas of Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba. I think most appropriate question so far which has been asked. Do you think this 4-day war was a little too limited, that we agreed too early for the ceasefire?
Thank you, first of all, for inviting me for your program. And I think we're starting with a very appropriate question. As to the 2 Maulanas, I'm very clear that is the bottom line. The Pakistan has never ever admitted the involvement of both these Maulanas with anything to do with terror. In fact, denial is Pakistan's greatest weapon. So it's a good thing that we must continue what the Honorable Defense Minister has also done of making a demand. We must continue doing this. He is on record earlier also to have demanded the issue of Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And I always favored it. We need to keep placing it on the block so that the world is reminded that POK, Pakistan occupied Kashmir, is a part of Indian territory. And also the reminder, very appropriate this time, that both the Maulanas are the villains to the peace, actually. And this is the bottom line requirement. Both of them must be repatriated to India to be tried here properly as per Indian laws. As to this question of an early end, all conflicts have their own nature. I think India started off with a particular political aim and a military aim, which were limited. Both of them were limited in nature. It was not the destruction of Pakistan. It was not the capture of Pakistan occupied Kashmir. It was to convey a clear message, a political will that should you up the ante, India has the capability of going beyond and keeping the entire aspect of escalation under control. I think we achieved our aims very largely. It could be debatable that we could have gone a day or maybe more or something. But I think largely when your political and military aim has been achieved, we should stop the war.
Commodore, perhaps 1 or 2 days more, we would have been able to degrade the capability of the forces which were backing the terrorists for doing these repeated incursions into Kashmir and India. What is your feeling? Do you think we could have continued for a day or more?
My sense is that, well, first of all, allow me to echo what Ata said. Thank you for having me on your show. And I think just to continue this thread in the conversation, yes, India had the capability perhaps to continue this operation tactically, maybe for another 24 hours, 48 hours. But that is where the correlation with the political objective that had been set out and the larger context, because India was not operating in isolation. There is the larger international context, and that derives from the fact that both India and Pakistan are nuclear weapon capable. And we are aware that there was a certain amount of concern mounting globally. And let's not forget that we have this assertion by the US President Donald Trump that he had a hand in ensuring the cessation of hostilities. So, which is why I would say that if you look at this holistically, number one, India had the tactical ability to perhaps continue this for another 24 or 48 hours. But what was the correlation with the larger context, which is both the political objective that Ata was talking about, largely realized as per the assessment done in Delhi. And I think we should keep in mind that there was something happening internationally. We may or may not accept what is being said in Washington, but my sense is that was also playing, and therefore a decision had to be taken, which was taken. But if we had continued, we would have degraded the assets further, but my sense is in a marginal way, because they would have already dispersed by that time.
Okay, that leads me to the next question. 5 weeks now after Baisaran and that, senseless massacre, now we are in a position where now people are questioning, is it deterrence or is it back to status quo? How do you look at it?
That's a very good question, and the same question was asked in 2016.
Yes.
The surgical strikes in 2019 with the Balakot strike. As you've seen, escalation has been going up. This time 9 targets, the center of gravity in Punjab, which was also struck. Earlier, we went only up to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. In 2016, we went only into Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Even at that time, a lot of people felt that we had deterred Pakistan, and I always felt that there was no question of deterrence. By carrying out counter-terrorism kind of strikes, you don't deter. It is only through carrying out major military strikes that you can possibly carry out a deterrence. To that extent, this time it's definitely a debatable issue. But I would say we have perhaps achieved an element of dissuasion more than deterrence. Because when it comes to terrorism, you don't require large concentration of armies on the borders to carry out terrorist strikes. If you have 75 to 100 to 130 terrorists in Jammu and Kashmir today, getting a motley group of 5 or 6 or 10 of them together to carry out another strike is always possible. It's the impact of that. Can Pakistan withstand what India will subsequently do? And that issue is again a very debatable thing. So I think at the end of the day, I don't think India ever set out to create a deterrence out of the operations that they were doing. It was a clear political message which was sent out. There was a degree of degradation of terrorist infrastructure which was carried out. But I think the broader understanding we have is that it is possible that Pakistan will once again do this. For us to be able to deter him, it will have to be absolutely unacceptable kind of a cost that Pakistan will have to bear. And that in a nuclear environment is something very difficult. Keeping in mind the fact also that anything territorial here is likely to be a red line. Like POK, for example, is a total red line. And you will find yourself, therefore, engaged in some kind of initial stages of a nuclear exchange.
I appreciate your view, and Commodore, you'll also agree that to a certain extent, it's right that we have delivered a very, very strong message, as General says. But it should dissuade Pakistan from some kind of adventurism very soon again. What do you feel?
You know, I would respond in the following manner, just to pick up again what Atta has said. Number one, I think Prime Minister Modi, through his actions, has definitely put Pakistan on notice. I'm picking up a strand that we had just said as we were having coffee. And that he has been successful. But, and this is where I want to add another line, which is that I'm an analyst. So you'll forgive me if I'm a purist in terms of the semantic and the choice of word. Going back to your first question, I think the two gentlemen who were identified by the Defense Minister, Mr. Rajnath Singh, I think the prefix Maulana should be removed. They do not qualify, given the fact that they are, that's one. But taking the same thread forward, deterrence as a concept should be kept confined to the nuclear realm. India should invest in robust nuclear deterrence with Pakistan, with China, who are the other nuclear capable neighbors we have, which is also crisis proof. So that is deterrence to me in a classical sense, and forgive me if I'm being, being so exact about the choice of word. But I think what we should do, and again, Atta is absolutely spot on, that we should have the ability and the leverage to dissuade Pakistan from acting in this manner, which means, again, to use the jargon of strategic thought, we have to bring to bear a certain degree of compellence on the adversary to act in a manner that is in consonance with your larger political and strategic objective. That, to my mind, has been the Indian objective since October 1947, when Pakistan used the irregulars for the first time. In each iteration, it is the same kind of play. And I'm afraid, again, I fully agree with Atta. We had Uri, it did not stop Balakot. We had Balakot, it did not stop Pahalgam. So the challenge for Prime Minister Modi or any Prime Minister in India is, how do you ensure that there will not be another Pahalgam? And how do you ensure that an Indian, whether he is a tourist or a foreigner or any citizen or any resident in India at a given point in time, is not a victim of terrorism? That is your holy grail.
Okay, General, then let me push this point further. The troops will come back to the normal. The firing in the LOC will stop. It will peter out. There'll be discussions again. How does the armed forces remain in readiness to strike back when something like this happens again? Because one is not sure whether it's a complete deterrence or not. There are so many other things to look at. The air defense systems, our Air Force, our Navy. How do you prepare for this? Have we raised the threshold? How are we going to react to another terrorist attack then?
I always classify the actions which Pakistan has been taking in the form of proxy war, not as classical conventional war, but primarily as hybrid. Everything has been hybrid since 1989 in particular. Ideological, financial, running of overground workers, all kinds of activities in the rest of India which have been going on. I think for the first time, India chose to also respond in the hybrid domain, rather than limiting it to a conventional domain, which we are always prone to doing. I think that's a strong message we've sent out. And therefore, it is not necessary that the military is the only way that you can do things. And within the military, the army and the air force are not the only organizations which can actually turn the screws.
But this time the army played a role, as you were telling us.
The army
in
played
operation.
a key role in terms of its long-range artillery, in some of its other vectors. Also, the integrated air defense system, which was there.
Yes.
To my mind, the next cycle, if we had gone beyond this ceasefire, the next cycle of violence would definitely have been with the involvement of the Indian Navy, which was, as you're aware, fully ready at that particular time, and it would have upped the ante definitely. But having said that, we also chose, in the 15 days that we waited for this operation to start, we also chose to use the Indus Water Treaty.
Yes.
We also used diplomacy to some extent, although we could have perhaps been a little more offensive on that. But the Indus Water Treaty was definitely a very, very important thing, of which we had spoken for years, but somehow never had we sort of gone down to the level of being able to do it. And that the government definitely deserves accolades for executing this. Now, to take it to the next level and make sure that Pakistan actually pays the cost through the aspects of the Indus Water Treaty will be up to our engineers and everyone else. The armed forces, keeping them in a state of mobilization will be akin to 2002-2003 when we went into Parakaram and suffered more casualties at the end of the day rather than anything else. So I think a very fine model has emerged this time. More than that, and going a little beyond that, and I'm sure we'll discuss the status of Kashmir itself, I would say our state of readiness has to be of a higher order, much higher order. Not only in Jammu and Kashmir, but the rest of India. Because the rest of India is susceptible to it. And this kind of a thing, proxy war, can happen in any part of India.
Commodore, what do you think? How do we remain in a state of readiness all the time to react immediately, because we've raised the bar so high?
You know, I represent the silent service here. So I would say that there are certain options available to the government of the day, meaning that when we talk about military capabilities, it's like, what do you have in your quiver? And there are many capabilities. Some are visible. Air power is visible. The army is visible. The Navy represents, along with other capabilities which are below the radar in terms of visibility. And even in the current Operation Sindoor, and going back to Kargil, which was 1999, I just want to inform our viewers and the audience generally that the Navy plays a role, but at the national apex, you know, at the CCS, the Prime Minister and the Naval Chief and all the other military hierarchy, the Navy is a bit like a remote, if I can use that as an example, meaning that you can sit in Delhi and use the remote to increase the temperature, you know, in terms of the control you have, the thermostat. And on the adversary, you can increase the pressure through signaling. So what the Navy does is that it acts as what is called as a force in being. So in this case, in the Arabian Sea, in certain critical areas, the Indian Navy had ensured that it was visible where visibility was required, which is the surface ship. You also had some capabilities that were not visible. For instance, the underwater. Now, even the underwater, a submarine is something that is identified as an underwater platform. But all credible navies have other assets which are almost invisible, and their ability to inflict damage on the adversary can even be at 10-meter contact. So I'm just trying to give you a sense about the spectrum of options that are available to the Prime Minister who has this particular remote. So in that sense, I think India is able to calibrate various options, and we have not yet spoken about cyber and space.
Yes.
These are also capabilities, perhaps better not discussed in public. But if you allow me, Yash, I want to add one point to what Ata said. In terms of the diplomatic options that we exercised, I have a slightly different view about the Indus Water Treaty. This is the first time India has, in a way, brought water to the table.
Yeah.
It has not weaponized it yet because
Yes.
we've only said abeyance. We have not suspended, we have not withdrawn. But just remember again, water is a regional subject. It is not purely bilateral India-Pakistan. It involves South Asia. We also have China. So I constantly say in the early days of this, of Sindoor and water having been brought to the table, I said we have to do a cost-benefit analysis. At the end of a certain period, today there seems to be a lot of, I would say, emotive response that, oh, Pakistan ko humne pani band kar diya hai. That may not be the end of the story. So I just thought I'd put that on the table.
General, let me move to another area which is talked about now. And today Trump has made again another statement that I was able to stop nuclear fallout of this 4-day limited war. Now, the international press was a little slanted in its view. Where do you think our narrative went wrong? Were we sort of underreporting, or were we very secretive? Why is it that, NYT or Washington Post or many of these reports which were coming in sort of gave us a position of equivalence, or if not, much better reporting on the Pakistani side? Is there something wrong with our narrative?
Firstly, Azad, I have no doubt at all that our claims that we have made in public were absolutely genuine. As you say very correctly, it's a question of putting them across and making them credible and believable to the international community and people in general. Now, that can happen in different ways. In this particular case, I would say, in generic terms, if I may be permitted to go back and say, in generic terms, our communication strategy has always been a step behind our overall diplomacy, our overall proactivity in the military realm, etc. Well, Pakistan has been taking the lead in this very often. For example, I just love to give this example where we find that the Inter-Services Public Relations, actually the agency got raised in Pakistan in 1949. And we have not institutionalized the thing.
That's information for many of us
today. Yeah. But having said that, in this current situation, I think it's good to just understand that we were the responders to an action which had happened. Pahalgam was a proactive action taken by Pakistan in terms of the proxy war. We were left to respond, and in those 15 days, there was an element of secrecy, classified information, etc. And when a nation is handling classified information, keeping its operations and potential response in secrecy, it becomes very, very difficult to go upfront in preparing yourself to deliver the narratives. I agree that yes, we could have been a little faster perhaps, but there is a gray zone kind of thing which appears, and in the initial stages of the launch, you may be still left floundering to wonder whether you should go whole hog in speaking about it or not. And that window is the window which was probably exploited by Pakistan. That's in this instant case. I would strongly recommend, as a lesson learned from this entire episode, is that we need to perhaps institutionalize our narrative management. When you've got something working for you and you know that you are on the right, you're morally, you're on a higher platform, you should have no hesitation. And this should be an organization which probably caters for this entire thing. I said the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting is a very credible organization which has got a wealth of talent, and perhaps we could exploit it a little better.
Can I add to this?
Sure.
Number one, I'll put my head on the block and say that Op Sindoor, preceded by the Pahalgam massacre, terror attack of April 22, if you look at it from April 22 to where we are today, almost at the end of May, I would say India's strategic communication has been below par. I'm making a very clear statement, and I'll tell you why. Because in the first cycle, the first 12 hours, which is your critical period when Pahalgam happened, we were not on the ball.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, evidence to substantiate this, whereas Pakistan was already preparing for whatever it was going to make its own narrative. And for me, the disappointment is that we can do better and we have done better. Let me share an experience with you that I was, privy to. This is India went nuclear in May 1998. Mr. Vajpayee was the Prime Minister. And we had Kargil in 1999.
Yes.
In that period, I'm going to name a few names if you allow me. Vajpayee Saab was the Prime Minister. The NSA at that time was also the PS, Mr. Brijesh Mishra.
Yes.
And I was then part of the IDSA. And our former director was Mr. K. Subramaniam. The, well-known, legendary K. Subramaniam, K. Sub as he's called. And our foreign secretary was Mr. Raghunath. And at that time, a small team was put together. In the aftermath of May 98, Mr. Naresh Chandra was our ambassador in New York. And what we did was to have our narrative out there where it mattered, particularly in Washington. And then, when Kargil happened, there was an interregnum, because if you remember, we had the Lahore Accord also. There was the core, group that was in a way looking at some elements of strategic communication. All of us were new to it, but we picked up as we went along. There were many others. Mr. Mani Dixit was also there, if I remember right, here, Commodore Jasjeet, others, Raja Mohan. And what India did was to put across its story, first of all, in the international domain. We had a very credible story. And by the time you came to Kargil, Mr. Nawaz Sharif was the Prime Minister, there was a lot of empathy for India, both in the State Department, as they say in the Beltway, and around the Beltway. NPR, a very credible kind of organization, the National Public Radio, which has a huge reach in the US. So we did this. And to me, the recall is that Mr. Brijesh Mishra was on the ball. We could reach out to him well before the cell phone. I remember 2 or 3 occasions Mr. Subbu sent me on a scooter, because I was a two-wheeler guy, to go and give a certain message. And that made an impact in terms of how the story was portrayed, because we had a good story. Ata spot on. India always has a good story. This time we didn't tell it well.
General, tell me, in Kashmir now, we are back to where it all started. There is a lot to be done. If you see the incidents we have talked about, whether it was Bombay 2008, whether we talk about Uri, whether we talk about Pulwama, all these, there was a clear hand of Pakistan. We gave the evidence, we prepared the dossiers, we put it all over the capitals in the world, and everyone appreciate. This time, the terrorists have not been found yet. So what we need is actually a demonstrable evidence, which is required. So a lot of work to be done within Kashmir. You're right, also within India. A lot of sleeper cells have to be flushed out and things like that. But Kashmir, again, you commanded the Uri brigade. The entire area and the security grid has to be looked at again. There are too many things to be done. What do you feel now are emergent requirements just now in Kashmir?
Thank you. I think that's a brilliant question, absolutely. That's where it all started from, in Pahalgam. That's the trigger. So obviously, we got to go back there. First of all, let me say that 2019, 5th of August, landmark event, removal of Article 370, cascading decisions and processes thereafter. Things were going well. I think one of the best things which happened was that the intelligence agencies, the investigative agencies, for the first time went after the networks.
Yeah.
Terror always rides on networks, and here networks were being dismantled completely. Not that we have been able to dismantle them all, but we've achieved a tremendous success in this. So that's the first point, that this must continue completely. Without any hesitation, all possible networks, overground worker networks, drug networks, financial networks, media networks, anything like that which is a network on which this whole thing rides, this has to be dismantled. The whole issue of radicalism has to be taken by the scruff of the neck completely. And I have always felt that unless you involve the clergy itself, The clergy has been involved in radicalization, and they are the ones who will have to do the de-radicalization and counter-radicalization. And there are many of them in India who will be always willing to be taken on board to do this. So that's one part of it. But I think somewhere along the line, from a security angle and within the security forces, some kind of a notion started appearing as if there is complete normalcy and that the whole Pakistan's narrative has been completely lost. I'll give you an example. Unspoken circles in the army, for example, spoke about the Rashtra Rifle unit being reduced from 6 companies to 4 companies. The army fought for those 6 companies in 1989. And prematurely, one should never take this kind of a decision unless you see clear conflict termination and resolution staring at you in the face. That was not there. So I think we'll have to take a very conscious decision. No change in this grid. This grid must remain strongly embedded, must be backed up completely. The problem which normally happens in a situation where terrorism is seen to be coming to an end is that you had 3,000, 3,500 terrorists here, now dwindled down to 75 to 100 to 130. Obviously, you can't kill them all. They'll be somewhere or the other in nooks and corners here and there. Always retain the capability of being able to put together an operation somewhere. The question is how you optimize yourself. Your intelligence. Now, in the case of Pahalgam, one thing which we are very clear is that communication intelligence, signal intelligence has dried up. I remember as a colonel running operations in South Kashmir, everything depended on the intercepts we were getting.
It's electronic.
So today's technology,
yes,
spoofing which is going on, and a lot of Chinese equipment has come in there. Lots of Chinese secrecy equipment has come in with the terrorists. So almost everything that is being spoken by the terrorists today, nothing is being intercepted. So obviously the answer to it is better technology, and the other answer to it is better human intelligence. And that is something we'll have to invest in much more.
Yeah.
It happens, these are tendencies and trends whenever you find terror situations start dwindling down, you find a backseat being taken on issues such as this. Less investment in intelligence, less investment in going after the networks. But I think we'll have to stay the course. That's a very, very important aspect that we must stay the course. Also, on a political-diplomatic level, this hyphenation, which somehow has been emerged this time in this crisis of India and Pakistan, that must be removed completely. And we must work diplomatically on that particular aspect. And lastly, I think the balance in operations, hard versus soft. This is something that India has achieved tremendously. Operation Sadbhavna and things of that kind. Well, let's review it. Let's look at it afresh. Let's not have something which has been running for 30 years. Review it wherever you find pitfalls. Let's get over them. But I think a larger brainstorming of the Indian internal security community is required to be able to achieve all this.
Absolutely right. Commodore Bhaskar, tell me, the general has rightly talked about the internal security. As an analyst, I want to ask you 2 questions. One is, of course, what are the immediate things we need to gear up on the internal security front? Of course, screening out and flushing out and things like that. And secondly, people are really keen to know if you could describe what exactly did the Navy do during Operation Sindoor?
You know, these are 2 fantastic questions, and I am going to rise to the bait if I will. Number 1, Yash, you're a senior IPS officer, and I was waiting for somebody in the IPS to give me an opportunity to respond to this. I think the short Twitter answer is India's intelligence lapses lie at the door of the IPS. It's a very strong statement I'm making.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm saying this is, as a student of India's internal security, for 30 years almost, where I was in the IDSA to where I am now, I look like Rip Van Winkle. But we started in the early 90s when Mr. Narasimha Rao was Prime Minister. You were in the service then. You know the kind of challenges we had. The community was much smaller. We had no cell phones, we had no social media,
No, nothing.
and we were dealing with some of the same issues. And what I will say in summary is that from Kargil of 1999, which was the first war that we had in a limited way with Pakistan, to now, Pahalgam in 2025, each time it's an intelligence lapse or inadequacy. We said this in Kargil, we were surprised. 2008, Mumbai, the attack from the sea. Then we had Pulwama Balakot, we were surprised. Pahalgam, we were surprised. What have we learnt? Institutionally. And if you remember, I'm going back to Kargil 1999, Mr. Vajpayee as Prime Minister sets up the Kargil Review Committee headed by K. Subramaniam. Report is out in less than 6 months, tabled in Parliament. One important strand is intelligence reforms. I remember personally taking notes when the NSA was there about what needs to be done. It's not for lack of recommendations, and I can cite NSAs from Mr. Brijesh Mishra downwards. Some were more receptive, some were less receptive. But what I gather is that the IPS institutionally has not allowed the kind of reforms that ought to have been taken, and I'd love your response on this. If you want me to talk about the Navy, I'll do so now, but I'd love to hear your point about, is the IPS culpable?
Well, let's say the intelligence reform, let's leave it for another discussion of this kind. But
then I'll come back to the Navy.
You please come back to the Navy.
See, on the Navy, as I said, I think what the Navy did, again, I go back to Kargil to where we are now, it has, in a way, given the government of the day certain options. And this time around, even as the temperature was increasing tactically from day one till the cessation of hostilities, I think the Indian Navy was able to be present where it had to be present and also give an indication that if there was a need and we went into another day, that it could deliver not only ordnance, it could also carry out surveillance and complement what was being done, because at the end of the day, and you'll allow me to make this point again, we should not stop at being triumphant about the tactical victories. Yeah. We have to go back to Pahalgam. Pahalgam was a terror attack. Indian citizens and tourists were killed. It is the responsibility of the state, going back to Chanakya, that is the dharma, the Raja Dharma, that the Indian citizen is safe. And I think there we have failed. In Kashmir, it has been repeatedly demonstrated that are we getting carried away by the optics? You know, Ata made this point that there is a little bit of success. Perhaps we are overemphasizing it and living in our own bubble, and there is no accountability. Pahalgam happened. Where is the accountability? Which heads have rolled? My earnest suggestion, if your show reaches the right places, there should be a review from Kargil to Pahalgam, which takes forward the recommendations made in the Kargil Review Committee of 2000.
And why not from the 2008 Mumbai attacks?
Yeah, there you are.
Absolutely.
Let's talk to Ambassador Veena Sikri, one of the well-known diplomats of our country. Can you tell me, why was the response of the international press slanted to this limited war? We gave the proof. International air warfare specialists also gave very precise areas where we bombed our air defense system, and yet the press, whether it's the NYT or whether it's the Washington Post, had a very kind of a colored view, and they put us on equivalence, or they were, kind of supporting the Pak narrative. What is your view?
Well, I must say on this, I want to make 2 points here. Firstly, that China has bought up the international press. And they, WAPO, Washington Post, NYT, they're in the hands of China. Economists, Financial Times, China has given them so much support, so much money over the years that they write editorials according to what China wants. This is discussed even in the Western circles. It's not just I'm saying it. Many people are saying it, and it is there. Now, China has been greatly embarrassed by the events of what happened, on May 7th and on May 10th. They have been, I think, first of all, overawed by the success of India's own air defense systems, where we were able to resist all the onslaught of the various missiles, so-called very, very effective missiles that China has given to Pakistan. And secondly, this is our Akash system. And then they were absolutely overwhelmed by the accuracy of our BrahMos missiles and the way they were able to hit their target. And this is an home-built BrahMos missile has been manufactured entirely in India. It's Russian and India creation. joint creation, but manufactured entirely in India. And look at the effectiveness and look at the way we are reading of how the DRDO has been working on it. Now, this is something that China could not stand for. In fact, we know that this Chinese famous missile, which is supposed to be so destructive, landed unexploded in various fields in Punjab. And they have been taken by the Indian side, and we, of course, must be doing some reverse engineering on them. But this was a great blow to China. They tried to cover up by it by saying, I've seen even some of the media in China itself, they stopped short. Oh, they're going on saying we've downed some Indian aircraft and so on. They don't talk about May 10th. They don't talk about May 10th at all. You know, that narrative is just not there. And they want to keep the narrative that way in the international media as well, to show that, to hide the fact that Chinese missiles and Chinese air defense systems, because India was able to pierce the air defense systems. Even on May 7th and on May 10th, we were able to pierce the so-called infallible Chinese air defense system. We were pierced in seconds, and we found the target accurately, exactly what we wanted. So I think this is something that China is carrying on, but it is, you do see, I've seen many assessments by, for example, American defense experts, American military experts. They have given the correct and accurate assessment that, India's missile system, India's air defense system have proved to be very effective. And certainly the rest of the world will wake up and see how India has done so much of it themselves, how this Atmanirbharta, the self-reliance, has paid off for India.
Thank you, Ambassador Sikri, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, friends, did we have a story to tell, as Commodore Uday Bhaskar says? Or we have to do some very hard selling next time? As an IPS officer, I'm also concerned about intelligence, reform, its failures. And as Commodore Bhaskar said, IPS seems to be against the intelligence reform. I personally don't think so. But certainly it's a subject worth contemplating upon. How do we bring about changes in intelligence? And that will be our next program on Yashovism. Thanks for watching.